In the National Football League, everything, and I mean absolutely everything, can change in a matter of seconds. You can spend months, literally months, meticulously building a roster in the offseason. You can design a completely foolproof scheme. You can establish this undeniable culture of invincibility in the locker room. And then, with just one snap of the football, one terrible, fateful moment on the turf, that entire foundation just shatters into a million pieces, right? So let's really dive into this today. Because this explainer isn't just about a football team losing some games on a Sunday. It is a cinematic, real-time look at a complete structural collapse. The 2026 Indianapolis Colts were sitting on top of the world. They had it all figured out. And then, the ground beneath them completely gave way. So the big question we really have to ask ourselves here is, how does a team go from an 8-2 powerhouse? I'm talking about a team that was genuinely feared by every single defensive coordinator in the league, to an 8-9 disaster. Think about that for a second. This wasn't just some gradual decline, right? It wasn't a slow leak in a tire where you kind of see it coming. No, this was a catastrophic 200-mile-per-hour blowout on the highway. And to truly understand the sheer gravity of this collapse, we have to meticulously examine every single domino that fell. We're going to track this from the absolute heights of their dominance straight down into the darkest, coldest depths of their winter spiral. But hey, real quick, before we completely dissect the anatomy of this massive disaster, please make sure you subscribe to NFL Nexus. Hit that like button and definitely leave a comment down below with your thoughts on the Colts' future because I really want to know what you guys think. Also, I highly encourage you to consider becoming a channel member today. Taking that step directly supports these deep, premium documentary-style explainers that we put together for you. We literally rely on you guys to keep the lights on and keep the film rolling. Okay, let's get back to the tape. Look at this contrast. I mean, it is just brutal. We are looking at a tale of two entirely different seasons that were somehow trapped within the exact same calendar year. Just look at weeks 1 through 10. They racked up 8 wins and boasted the deadliest offense in the entire NFL. Head coach Shane Steichen had implemented a scheme that was, for all intents and purposes, flawless. The spacing, the pre-snap motion, the timing, it was just a beautiful symphony of offensive destruction. Defenses were completely, totally off balance. But then, you look at weeks 11 through 18. 0 wins. A systemic failure so profound, so deep, it honestly looked as if the entire roster had forgotten how to play the sport of football. The contrast is just absolutely staggering. It's literally the tragedy of a masterpiece being burned to ashes right in front of our very eyes. And at the dead center of this entire tragedy is our main protagonist, Daniel Jones. You see, the 2026 season for the Indianapolis Colts was built on a razor's edge. And that edge? It was entirely dependent on the physical health of this single quarterback. When Jones first took the reins of Shane Steichen's offense early on, something just clicked. It was magic. The processing speed was finally there. The accuracy was pinpoint. His early performance didn't just meet the preseason expectations, it absolutely shattered them. He was managing the pocket like a veteran, distributing the ball with lethal, surgical efficiency, and looking every single bit like the franchise savior that Indianapolis had been desperately searching for. But, as we all know too well, in the NFL, reliance on one single man is an incredibly dangerous game to play. During what we can now call the MVP mirage, the ceiling for this team seemed completely limitless, right? I mean, Jones wasn't just surviving inside Steichen's system, he was completely mastering it. He posted these unexpected, elite numbers that had national analysts frantically rewriting all their narratives on live television. The flawless operation of this offense created genuine, undeniable MVP candidate buzz. He was firmly, solidly on the path to his very first Pro Bowl. I mean, he was checking into all the right plays at the line, reading the opposing safeties perfectly, and delivering the football with this intense veteran anticipation. It was a fairy tale. It really was. But the thing about mirages, they always disappear the second you get too close. Which brings us to this incredible insight. Brad Gagnon over at Bleacher Report noted something crucial. He wrote, "The Colts vibe is wishful because Daniel Jones remains a question mark, both in terms of his health and his ability to finally deliver a full, successful season as a franchise quarterback." I want you to really focus on that one word for a second, wishful. That implies that underneath all those gaudy statistics, underneath the winning streak, the foundation was dangerously fragile. Wishful thinking means you're hoping against the overwhelming odds. It means the front office knew, the coaches knew, and honestly, perhaps even the diehard fans knew deep down inside that they were constantly walking a tightrope without a net. And that underlying fragility? Well, it stems from an inescapable physical toll. Let's just look at this history. Ankle sprains, concussions, calf strains, a torn ACL, and now a torn Achilles. Just let that sink in. Each and every one of these injuries represents months of grueling, agonizing rehab. They represent moments of sheer pain on the turf and this creeping psychological dread that it could happen all over again. In a city that is still deeply haunted by the tragic injury lore of Anthony Richardson Sr., this recurring nightmare felt almost inevitable, didn't it? The human body always keeps the score, and Jones's body has basically been at war for 7 long years. So the grand illusion finally shattered in Week 9. The Pittsburgh Steelers didn't just beat the Colts on a Sunday afternoon, they brutally exposed the blueprint to the rest of the league. Imagine the scene, the sky darkening over the stadium, the tension in the air. The Steelers' defense, which is always so physical and relentless, realized that Steichen's brilliant offense relied super heavily on rhythm and timing. So, what did they do? They decided to violently disrupt the metronome. They brought constant, overwhelming, exotic blitzes. They disguised their coverages post-snap to confuse his reads. They didn't just find a crack in the Colts' armor. They literally ripped the armor completely off, revealing the vulnerable quarterback trying to hide underneath it all. 4 interceptions. Across just the span of Week 9 against the Steelers and then Week 10 against the Falcons, a sudden, completely suffocating panic just set in on the field. 4 different times, Daniel Jones put the football directly into the hands of the enemy. You could literally watch the tape and see his processing speed completely break down under that relentless pressure. That flawless timing we saw from the first 8 weeks, it evaporated. It turned into rushed throws off his back foot, massive miscommunications with his wide receivers, and a desperate, completely failing attempt to just keep that fairy tale season alive. And 6 fumbles. I really want you to let that number hang there in the air for a second. 6 fumbles in just 2 games. Picture it in your mind. The pocket just completely collapsing from the edges, the massive blindside hits, the football constantly, agonizingly hitting the turf. Every single time he dropped back to pass, there was just this overwhelming sense of dread taking over the stadium. The grip was loosening, literally loosening on the football itself, and metaphorically loosening on the entire 2026 season. It was an absolute masterclass in defensive pressure, utterly and completely destroying an offensive game plan. 12 sacks. This is exactly where the physical toll just became totally unbearable. 12 different times over 2 weeks, Daniel Jones was violently driven into the ground. Spend a moment just thinking about the sheer rattling violence of taking 12 full-speed sacks from world-class defensive linemen and linebackers. The offensive line, which had been previously heralded as this elite unit, looked completely and utterly lost out there. Jones became visibly rattled. You could see his eyes dropping down to look at the pass rush instead of keeping them downfield on his receivers. The constant, unrelenting blitzes had broken the rhythm, they had broken the scheme, and very, very shortly, they would break the player. And then came the final blow, a fractured fibula and a torn Achilles, all at once. It is a completely devastating, horrific combination of injuries. The moment it happened, the moment the medical staff rushed onto that field, the entire stadium just went dead silent. You could drop a pin and hear it. You could almost hear the structural collapse of the Colts' entire 2026 season echoing right through the stands. It was the absolute worst-case scenario fully realized in real time. All those wishful hopes, they were dead, gone. And the drop-off after that was immediate. It was night and day. On one side of the coin, you had a healthy Daniel Jones running Steichen's complex system flawlessly, with super high efficiency. On the other side, you had veterans Phillip Rivers and Riley Leonard desperately attempting to step in and stop the bleeding, but the replacements simply couldn't replicate it. They couldn't manage the dizzying pre-snap motions, and they couldn't read the leverage of the linebackers nearly as effectively. The intricate system just completely stalled out, and the offense ground to a violent, screeching halt. The undeniable truth was that the scheme simply didn't work without its master at the controls. When you look at the visual data here, the contrast is just staggering. It's almost hard to believe it's real. The first 10 games yielded 8 towering, dominant wins. But those final 7 games, an absolute flatline, a complete and total void of success. Week after agonizing week, the defense went out there and tried to hold on, the special teams tried to force a spark or make a play, but the offense had just become a black hole. It ended up being the longest, most torturous losing streak of the entire year in the NFL. It was a slow, bleeding death of a season that had genuinely begun with legitimate Super Bowl aspirations. 7 straight losses. Just let the crushing weight of that grim reality hang in the air for a second. To start a season 8-2, to actually feel the unstoppable momentum of a runaway freight train, only to crash so incredibly violently that you end up finishing 8-9, that is psychological torment for a locker room. That kind of collapse breeds serious finger-pointing. It completely destroys a team's confidence, and it leaves a permanent, ugly scar on the franchise's history. Imagine 7 straight weeks of going into the facility on a Monday, watching the grueling film and just knowing deep down that you simply do not have the firepower on the field to win a football game. So the immediate impact was brutal on multiple fronts. First off, the kinks in the offensive armor were now permanently exposed on tape for the whole league to study for next year. Second, it highlighted this overwhelming, absolutely fatal reliance on a single player. We always say football is the ultimate team sport, right? Yet here we are, seeing the brutal reality that a brilliantly designed offensive scheme is wholly and completely paralyzed without its specific starting quarterback. And finally, it sent the entire franchise spiraling into total uncertainty. The illusion that this team had real, sustainable depth was totally shattered. So now we have to shift our focus to the macro level. What changes now? Because this massive spiral of the Indianapolis Colts isn't just about the 2026 season anymore. Not at all. This collapse sends massive shockwaves straight through the front office, echoing right down the halls to the general manager's desk and reverberating all the way out into the fan base. Look, when an 8-2 season ends up finishing 8-9 because you lost your quarterback, you don't just go in and tweak a few pages in the playbook. No, you have to question the entire roster construction. You have to sit down and ask some incredibly hard, deeply painful questions about the future of the organization. And because of that uncertainty, the rumors are already surfacing. Reports are out there that multiple Colts players are currently believed to fetch first-round picks if they were to be put on the trade block. Think about the massive developmental scale of this story now. This is the agonizing choice the front office is facing today. Do you hold on to your expensive star players and just pray for some sort of medical miracle next year? Or do you look at the reality of a fractured fibula, look at the reality of a torn Achilles, and initiate a massive franchise-altering fire sale? The future of the Indianapolis Colts heavily hinges on this terrifying realization that their championship window might have just violently slammed shut. So the franchise now stands at this massive crossroads, just staring down 2 vastly different paths. Path 1, you trade for those first-round picks. You tear the whole thing down, you amass a mountain of draft capital, you swallow your pride, admit defeat on this current era, and start a grueling rebuild for 2028 and beyond. Or there's path 2. You wait for a healthy Daniel Jones. You hold tightly onto that wishful hope. You risk absolutely everything on a player who has a 7-year history of devastating injuries, just hoping against hope that he can somehow magically recreate the dominance of those first 10 weeks. The risk of holding on to that hope is paralyzing. But man, the pain of tearing it all down for draft capital, that is equally terrifying. And the craziest part? This isn't over yet. The true cost of this 2026 season will not be fully understood for years to come. What this explainer really shows us is that a team's true fragility is so often hidden beneath this shiny veneer of early season success. The ripple effects of this collapse, the coaching jobs that might be lost, the blockbuster trades that might be made, the fan trust that has been deeply, deeply fractured, all of that is going to define the Indianapolis Colts for the next half-decade for sure. The collapse itself was breathtakingly sudden, but I promise you, the cleanup is going to be agonizingly slow. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Is a potentially healthy quarterback, one who is heavily haunted by a history of severe injury, truly worth risking the entire future of a multi-billion-dollar franchise? Or is it finally time for a total, tear-it-down-to-the-studs rebuild in Indy? What would you honestly do if you were sitting right there in the general manager's chair? Let me know your plan down in the comments, and remember, please subscribe to NFL Nexus, hit that like button, and become a channel member today to help us keep bringing you premium explainers exactly like this one. We'll see you next time.